Something lurks in Alberta's forgotten places, and tonight, I'm taking you there, where small towns hide their darkest secrets beneath ice and silence. Welcome back to Mr.Darkmare. Tonight we are venturing into the isolated corners of Alberta's rural landscape, where friendly neighbors and quiet roads conceal tales of vanished souls, unexplained visitors, and mysteries that have festered beneath prairie snow for generations. These are the stories locals whisper only when darkness falls, because acknowledging their truth means accepting that nowhere is truly safe. If this is your first time here, subscribe to Mr.Darkmare for daily horror content that will haunt your nights. Hit that bell icon so you never miss when darkness calls. Now let's step into the shadows of Alberta's backroads and dying towns where civilization fades and terror takes root. Story 1. The grain elevator. Everyone said our town stopped breathing when the railway ceased operations, but that wasn't accurate. It continued existing in a different way, inhaling softer through winds howling across barren fields and distant hums of highway trucks that most residents couldn't afford to use regularly. What truly died was our main street. Businesses went dark one after another until only the post office remained, a tavern surviving on cheap alcohol and bitter memories, and the ancient grain elevator standing at town's edge like a monument nobody possessed courage to demolish. That structure is where my tale starts. With that tower. I returned home after my mother suffered her second stroke. I was 35, financially broken, and exhausted from pretending city existence meant anything beyond different varieties of disappointment. Hospital expenses accumulated rapidly, and the only consistent employment I discovered was overnight security at the grain facility. The cooperative lacked funds to tear it down or renovate it, so they chose the cheapest alternative: pay someone to occupy the space nightly, ensure nobody trespassed, and pretend the structure still mattered. My initial viewing after all those years felt like visiting a gravesite. That concrete structure once defined my childhood. I recalled my father returning from shifts blanketed in dust, eyes crimson, shoulders permanently hunched from hauling grain and ascending ladders. When he perished in a plunge from an upper platform, the corporation labeled it a tragic incident and continued operations. They mailed us compensation barely covering funeral costs and a letter packed with words my mother never completed reading. She folded it once, very deliberately, and tucked it into the Bible she maintained on her nightstand. Now I stood there signing identical paperwork in the same office where they once documented his death report. The assignment sounded straightforward. Arrive at 8 evening. Conduct ground floor inspection. Monitor camera displays even though half the cameras were obsolete, and the remainder pointed at vacant parking areas. The company had disconnected power to the massive internal elevator a decade prior. No grain moved through the facility anymore. It proved cheaper trucking it to a modern installation 20 miles north. My role, the supervisor clarified, was primarily reassurance. Reassure the insurance carrier that the building wasn't being vandalized. Reassure the remaining farmers that their historic landmark wasn't becoming a hangout for restless youth. Nothing concerning up there, he stated, signing the final document with a weary gesture. Entire interior is secured tightly. You simply remain on the main level and in the office. Consider it compensated babysitting. I wanted to accept that. The initial week passed in absolute stillness. I brought a thermos of coffee, a paperback, and my mother's vintage radio for companionship. Wind rattled the sheet metal exterior, and occasionally a cargo train miles distant would sound like it approached right beside us, but otherwise nothing occurred. Just the consistent tick of the office clock and the dim buzz of fluorescent fixtures that rendered everything slightly sickly. The security arrangement was laughably basic. 4 monochrome monitors arranged on a metal rack. One displayed the office entrance, one the gravel parking area, one the tower base, and one, according to the label, interior walkway. That final one showed pure static. The supervisor mentioned the camera had malfunctioned years earlier, and nobody bothered repairing it because nobody accessed that area anymore. On my 5th evening, the static transformed. It was 2 in the morning. The building possessed a method of stretching time, making it feel like I'd existed there for days instead of hours. I was staring at the monitors without truly observing them, contemplating whether I could manage a second occupation once my mother returned from rehabilitation, when a flicker on the fourth screen captured my attention. For an instant, the static thinned and lines appeared. Horizontal bars resembling steps, a darker shape disrupting the pattern, then vanishing. I blinked, leaned nearer, and it disappeared. Just fuzz and white noise again. I convinced myself it was nothing. An ancient fade, some interference, perhaps the wind shaking the camera housing. Old wiring did peculiar things. Besides, even if the camera suddenly revived, there remained no power to the interior illumination or the elevator. Nobody could exist up there. That was the entire purpose. The following evening, the flicker returned. This occasion, the static cleared for a full 2 seconds. I observed a railing, a section of concrete flooring, and a portion of wall marked by dark streaks of aged water damage. The angle indicated it was somewhere elevated, possibly level with the top loading doors. At the frame's edge, just before the image dissolved, something moved. A shoulder, the side of a head, a person walking past the camera. My mouth went arid. I verified the timestamp at the screen's bottom. 1:43 morning, live broadcast. I stood so rapidly my chair toppled behind me. The office felt suddenly compressed, like the atmosphere had thickened. I seized the flashlight from the wall and approached the heavy steel doors leading into the main tower. The padlock remained in position, the keys heavy in my palm. The company had granted me access for emergencies exclusively, but they never specified what sort of emergencies they meant. If someone existed inside, that constituted an emergency. The lock was rigid with neglect. It required 3 attempts before it snapped open with a complaint. Cold atmosphere breathed outward from the dark stairwell beyond, carrying a smell I remembered from childhood: grain dust, oil, and something older, like wet stone. I swung the door open, the beam of my flashlight catching rust on the railings and a swirl of dust particles rising like startled ghosts. "Hello." My voice sounded incorrect in there, simultaneously too loud and too small. Silence responded. I took a step inside. The concrete stairs curved upward in a spiral, hugging the interior wall of the tower. My father used to climb these stairs every shift. I had a sudden image of his boots on the steps, the worn places in the middle where years of workers had passed. My chest constricted. I told myself it was merely the cold. The sensible part of my brain screamed that this was foolish. If an intruder existed, they could be hiding anywhere, and I was alone with nothing except a flashlight and a radio that probably wouldn't reach the highway, much less the sheriff in town. Simultaneously, another part of me, quieter but heavier, felt pulled upward. Toward the level where my father had died, toward the place that camera insisted was no longer empty. Step by step I climbed. The higher I ascended, the more the tower seemed to separate from the world. The wind outside faded to a distant hiss. My footsteps and my breathing were the only sounds. Stale atmosphere pressed in close. Dust stuck to my throat, making me want to cough but also afraid to make more noise. Every landing looked identical: a short platform, a locked door to some forgotten room, then another flight of stairs. By the time I reached the level marked 4, my legs burned. That was where my father's incident report said he had last been observed. Level 4, maintenance check, 11:17 evening. I ran my gloved hand along the metal railing, feeling the faint grooves where someone had once carved initials. I didn't need the flashlight to know whose they were. I had watched him scratch them in with a pocket knife when I was 12, proud to be part of the place. I swallowed hard and kept going. The camera, wherever it was mounted, had to be near the summit. The stairwell narrowed slightly as if the tower was closing its grip. The temperature dropped. My breath steamed in the beam of my flashlight. Finally, I reached a door that was different from the others. It had a faded sign reading walkway access, authorized personnel only. The lock was missing. The latch twisted like it had been forced once long ago. I pushed it open. Cold atmosphere rushed around me, carrying a low, hollow hum. The walkway stretched out into the darkness, a spindly metal bridge suspended over a vast drop I couldn't see but felt in my knees. My beam revealed glimpses. walls rising into blackness, the suggestion of bins and chutes, all of it coated in a pale film of dust. The silence was so complete that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The camera should have been obvious, but it wasn't. I walked slowly along the walkway, testing each step. Metal creaked under my weight. In the distance, a faint crimson light blinked. For an instant, I thought it was some piece of forgotten machinery, then realized it was positioned at head height, not on the floor. A small modern camera sat bolted to a railing post. Its lens pointed directly back toward the door I had just come through. That was incorrect. The supervisor told me the interior camera was ancient, mounted decades ago, and never upgraded. This thing looked like it could stream in high definition. "Who installed you?" I whispered as if the device could answer. The little crimson light blinked steadily. I stepped closer. The housing had a brand name I didn't recognize, and a cable ran from its base along the railing, disappearing into the darkness. I followed it, frowning. The wire was clean, no dust settled on it, which meant it had been put there recently. That didn't fit with the story I had been told. No budget, no updates, no one goes up there. At the far end of the walkway, the cable vanished through a drilled hole in the concrete wall. The edges of the hole were fresh, pale dust clinging to the floor below. Someone had bored through solid concrete to feed that cable somewhere. It absolutely didn't belong. A shiver crawled up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I backed away slowly, the flashlight beam trembling. I had seen enough. There was a camera up here, and someone had gone through substantial trouble to install it without informing the cooperative supervisor or anyone else. That camera feed was exactly what I had seen flickering on the office monitor. Someone was watching this place. The question was from where? By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs again, my legs felt weak. I locked the access door behind me, slipping the padlock back into place with shaking hands. In the office, the fourth monitor glowed calmly. No static now. The walkway was visible in murky monochrome. No sign of me, though I had just walked there, but the recording showed an empty walkway. That made no sense. I checked the timestamp. It was 3 minutes behind the actual clock, out of sync. Maybe a delay, I thought, some buffer. I sank into the chair, eyes glued to the screen, waiting to see myself appear. Instead, I saw someone else. A man stepped into frame from the far end of the walkway. He moved slowly, hands on the railing like he was testing each step. His shoulders were broad, his posture familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. He wore a work jacket I knew intimately, faded blue, one sleeve patched to the elbow, a stain near the collar that never came out no matter how much my mother scrubbed. My father's jacket. He walked right up to the camera, close enough that the frame filled with the front of that coat, the missing button I used to play with as a child. Then just before the feed flickered and cut to static, his head tilted in a way I recognized from dozens of old photographs, like he was listening for something only he could hear. The office clock ticked loudly in the sudden silence. I couldn't move. My mind raced through every possible explanation, clinging to any that didn't involve what I had just seen. Maybe it was old footage looping. Maybe someone had stolen the jacket from the house years ago. Maybe grief and fatigue were doing tricks to my vision. Anything but the obvious. I rewound the tape. There was no tape to rewind. The system was cheap, half digital, half analog, and the interior feed didn't have recording enabled. It was live view only. No storage, no history. I turned off the monitor. The room felt instantly darker, as if I had removed the only window left. My heart hammered in my chest, and I became acutely aware of the weight of the tower above me, the concrete mass that had taken my father and was now showing me something it shouldn't be able to show. I lasted another week at that assignment. Each evening the fourth monitor would come alive for a few seconds at some random hour, showing that same walkway, sometimes empty, sometimes with a shadow at the edge of the frame. Once, for a long frozen moment, with a man standing directly under the camera, face obscured by the brim of his hard hat, jacket zipped to his chin. His stillness felt incorrect, like he was waiting for me to notice him. I never went back up the stairs. I told myself there was no point. I knew the camera was there. Knowing where its cable went wouldn't change anything about what I kept seeing. I started bringing a second thermos filled with something stronger than coffee, hoping numbness would help. It didn't. Sober or buzzed, the feed appeared. The man appeared. The jacket appeared. On my final evening, the monitor stayed clear for almost a full minute. The man was farther down the walkway this time, near the door. He had his back to the camera, but there was no mistaking the slope of his shoulders. He paused with one hand on the knob, then turned just a little, like he was looking over his shoulder. Even in grainy monochrome, I could tell his eyes were pointed straight at me, as if he knew I was watching. Then he opened the door and stepped through. The frame entered. Static rolled in a soft wave across the image, then settled back into silence. The lock on the real door down the hall clicked softly at the same time. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my jacket, left the keys on the desk, and walked out into the cold night atmosphere without looking back. My breath streamed in front of me like smoke. The elevator loomed overhead, darker than the sky, its shape carved out by a faint halo of distant highway light. My phone buzzed as I reached my truck. A message from the supervisor. He wanted to know if I could cover extra shifts next month. They were thinking of cutting back on security again. Nothing ever really happens out there, he wrote. It practically watches itself. I didn't reply. I drove home on empty roads, watching the silhouette of the elevator in my rearview mirror until it finally disappeared behind the hills. Sometimes when the weather is clear and the wind blows just right, you can still see the top of that tower from my mother's kitchen window. It stands against the horizon like a gravestone, a piece of the past everyone else has learned to ignore. I tell myself what I saw on those screens was grief, leftover fear, static playing tricks on my brain. Then every once in a while, I wake in the middle of the night for no reason at all, heart pounding, the echo of a familiar jacket zipper in my ears. And I swear I can feel someone standing at the edge of my bedroom door, waiting for me to look up, the way I once sat waiting for that monitor to flicker to life. Story 2. The pharmacy apartment. The initial time I heard the voices through the floor, I assumed the pharmacy alarm had malfunctioned. It was just after midnight on a Tuesday, the variety of dead hour when small towns like ours feel like someone pressed pause on existence. I was sitting on the edge of my narrow bed, still in my work scrubs, counting the tips from my second job at the diner and wondering which bill I could afford to disregard that month. Below me, the aged pharmacy was locked, dark, and shuttered. I knew because I had activated the alarm myself and double-checked every door. I always did. At first, the sound was faint, a low murmur under my feet, like a radio left on in another room. I paused, held my breath, and listened. The murmur sharpened into words. A woman's voice, tight and shaky, reciting numbers. A man answering in a calm, clipped tone that made my stomach twist, even though I couldn't make out the actual phrases. It sounded exactly like a tense consultation at the counter during business hours, except no lights were on, no cars were parked outside, and the alarm, according to the little panel glowing beside my bed, was still armed. I told myself it was the pipes. This building was older than everyone who worked in it. The upstairs apartment had always been temporary housing for staff passing through, which is code in small towns for desperate people who will accept a cheap room and ignore the strangeness that comes with it. The owner, Mr. Kerr, had reduced my rent by $500 when my mother's medical debt forced us to sell our house. "You're part of the family now," he said, smiling in that way that never quite reached his eyes. "Pharmacy downstairs, room upstairs, easy. You'll hardly notice the place after a while." That night, I noticed everything. The voices rose and fell like a wave. I pressed my palm flat to the cold, scuffed hardwood, and felt nothing but a faint vibration. No footsteps, no drawers opening or closing, just the cadence of two people arguing over something exact and unforgiving. Dosages, my brain supplied. Test results, warnings. I'd heard enough similar conversations from behind the counter to recognize the tone, even if I couldn't grasp individual words. Then abruptly, silence. The alarm panel beside my bed didn't beep. No alerts, no faults. When the system detects movement downstairs after closing, it screams bloody murder. Tonight, it sat quiet and steady, a green light assuring me the world was secure. I lay awake until dawn, listening to nothing and waiting for something. In the morning, I convinced myself I had drifted off and dreamed the whole thing. Lack of sleep, double shifts, the constant pressure of being the one who dispenses pills she can barely afford when she needs them herself, it all adds up. Why not hallucinate pharmacy ghosts on top? The second night stripped away that excuse. It was almost exactly the same time. I had just turned off my lamp and was lying in the dark, scrolling through my phone when the voices started again. This time there were more of them. I recognized the layout in my mind without needing to see it. Someone was near the front, speaking quickly. Another further back by the consultation room, answering in slow, measured sentences. A third voice cut through both, older and rougher, insisting on something the others resisted. What made my skin prickle was the echo. The sound came not only from directly below but from the walls around me, like I was sitting inside a speaker. The building swallowed their words and fed them back as a blur of anger, fear, pleading. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the ceiling, even though I knew the problem was under my feet. Out of habit, I reached for the alarm remote on my nightstand. The system allows staff upstairs to disarm and check status without going down. The display showed armed, all zones clear. I pressed the info button. No faults, no open doors, no motion. According to the security system, downstairs was as silent as a tomb. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay rigid until the first smear of grey light bled around my curtains, the voices gradually fading as if someone was turning down a dial. When my alarm finally went off for my morning shift, I felt hungover from terror. By 9, I had almost convinced myself to say nothing. I didn't want to be the unstable new hire living above the shop, hearing things that didn't exist. But as I stood behind the pharmacy counter, printing labels and counting pills, I kept glancing toward the consultation room. The chairs arranged just so, the blood pressure cuff rolled tight, the door half closed like a mouth frozen mid-sentence. Around noon, when the lunch lull hit, I found my courage. "Hey, Mr. Kerr," I cleared my throat. "Has anyone else mentioned strange noises at night from down here?" He looked up from the inventory sheet he was marking. Pen paused mid-stroke. For a second, something flashed across his face, annoyance, or maybe recognition, before his features smoothed back into that practiced small-town geniality. "Old building, Ellie," he said. "It groans and complains. Heat cycling, wind, maybe a mouse or two. The walls talk more than the people do these days." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You get used to it." "I mean voices," I pressed immediately, regretting the quaver in my tone. "Like actual conversations at night when the alarm is on." His eyes flicked just once to the ceiling, then to the closed consultation door, then back to me. "Must be dreams," he said too quickly. "You work hard, long hours. Upstairs, the sound carries different. That's all. You'll settle in." He walked away before I could answer, leaving a faint chemical smell of antiseptic and aftershave in his wake. Over the next week, the pattern held. Midnight or a little after, the voices would start. Some nights they were muted, like faraway radio static. Other nights they were so clear I could almost pick out words before they slipped away. I began to recognize a rhythm, a panic start, rising intensity, a sharp break, then either a long silence or a low-level monologue that made my skin crawl. Once I heard something slam so hard it rattled my window. Yet the alarm panel at my bedside remained calm, green light unwavering. I started keeping a notebook, dates, times, descriptions, anything I could remember before fear erased the details. On my breaks, I dug through old files in the back office, pretending to look for insurance forms while my eyes scanned for anything unusual. There were gaps in the records, whole months where incident reports and consultation logs simply didn't exist, as if someone had pulled those pages out and never bothered to put anything back. One evening, just before closing, an older woman came in clutching a brown paper bag of pill bottles against her chest. Her hand shook so badly she could barely sign her name on the form I slid toward her. "I know they think I'm crazy," she whispered, eyes darting toward the consultation room. "But I remember what happened here. My husband, he didn't just drop dead. There were mistakes, arguments. They told me not to talk about it." I felt a cold line trace down my spine. "When was this?" I asked gently. She frowned, counting backwards in her head. 10 years. 11. Before they redid the front, before the paint. The old pharmacist, the one before him. She nodded toward the back where Mr. Kerr was printing reports. "He said it was fate's will, but I heard them through the floor of the apartment that night, shouting like someone was fighting over numbers." My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my gums. "Do you still live in that apartment?" I asked. Her eyes filled with something like pity. "No, dear. I moved as far as I could, but I still hear it. Some nights I wake up and swear I'm back there, listening to them decide how much medicine is too much." After she left, I found an excuse to slip upstairs before closing. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and stale fabric softener. My room door was just as I had left it. Across from it, another door stood closed and locked, paint chipped around the knob. I had never seen anyone go in or out. "Storage," Mr. Kerr had said when I moved in. "Nothing you need to worry about." I pressed my ear to it anyway. Nothing. No voices, just the quiet thump of my own pulse. That night, I tried something new. When the voices began, right on time like a cue, I didn't freeze in place. I grabbed my phone, opened the voice recorder, and placed it face down on the floor. The sound felt stronger that way, like it could climb through the boards. I watched the little red line trace across the screen as minutes ticked by. Murmurs surged and dipped, sometimes spiking into sharp syllables that made me flinch even though I couldn't quite understand them. After what felt like an hour, the noise stopped. I hit stop on the recording with shaking fingers. Listening back in the relative safety of morning light, it was almost worse. The raw sound from the floor had flattened into a low roar. Turned up, it became a mess of overlapping tones, but one thread cut through, a calm male voice repeating sequences of numbers in the same pattern over and over. Dosages, I realized, or perhaps blood pressure readings, or maybe something else entirely. Every time he finished, there was a pause, then a shorter, sharp response that always ended on the same clipped syllable. "No." At the very end of the recording, as the volume faded, I heard something else, a faint, steady beeping. Not the alarm system, not any machine we kept downstairs. This was slower, more organic, like a heart monitor tipping into a flat line. That was the day I stopped asking if anyone else had heard what I heard. It was clear they had, which meant their silence wasn't ignorance. It was choice. The more I listened, the more the line between my shifts blurred. Daytime, I dispensed medications in tidy white bags to people who had known me since I was in grade school. They made small talk about weather and hockey and gas prices. Nighttime, I lay above the same counters, the same pill bottles, and listened to echoes of decisions that couldn't be undone. Somewhere in between, I stopped believing the building was simply old. The last night I spent in that apartment, the voices didn't wait for midnight. It started as soon as I turned off the light. A sharp, panicked voice called out a name I recognized. One of our regulars, a man whose widow still came in every month to pick up her own prescriptions with quiet hands. Another voice answered, frantic, insisting on recalculations. Numbers crashed against each other, milligrams, times per day, adjusted for weight. I could suddenly make out whole phrases, like the floorboards had decided to translate. "You can't give him that much. The chart says. I'm telling you it's too high. Do you want him in pain?" Silence, heavy and thick. Then softly, "We are out of options." I bolted upright. The alarm panel blinked calmly at me, green and unbothered. For the first time, it occurred to me that maybe whatever happened down there, whenever it had happened, had never triggered any alarms at all. Something hit the consultation room door below with such force that the whole building shuddered. A hard thud, then a scraping, as if someone was sliding down it. I grabbed my phone with numb fingers and dialed the after-hours emergency line, the one that goes straight to the pharmacist on call. The ringing cut through the voices. 1 ring. 2. 3. Ellie, it was Mr. Kerr, sounding more awake than I had expected. Is everything all right? I opened my mouth to speak and heard through the floor my own voice answer before I could. Yes, everything is fine. Just the building settling. The sound was wrong, flat, mechanical, but it was my tone, my cadence, echoing up from the dark. For a second, I couldn't tell if the words were in my ear or my head. Good, he said slowly. Try to get some sleep. The line clicked dead. Below me, the murmur resumed, folding my borrowed voice back into its chorus. I sat frozen, phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended, listening to a conversation that shouldn't exist. By dawn, I had packed a single duffel bag, clothes, my certification papers, the notebook filled with dates and times and fragments I no longer wanted to decode. I left the keys on the kitchen counter next to the alarm remote, its little green light still insisting the world was safe. I moved into a cramped basement suite on the other side of town that afternoon. Longer commute, higher rent, thinner walls. I could hear my neighbors arguing, their television blaring, pipes clanking whenever someone showered. It was chaotic, alive, full of normal human noise. But some nights, when the wind is just right and the town is wrapped in that peculiar prairie stillness, I wake up convinced I hear it again, a murmur under my bed that doesn't match the layout of my new place. A calm male voice reciting numbers. A woman saying no. And somewhere in there, faint but unmistakable, my own voice assuring someone that everything is fine, that the building is just settling, that they should try to get some sleep. I don't go back to the pharmacy anymore. I found work 3 towns over in a newer clinic with fresh paint and a different alarm system. People there sometimes ask why I left a stable job and a cheap apartment. I tell them I wanted a change. What I don't say is that I finally understood what those midnight arguments were really about. They weren't about the patients, not really. They were about who had to live with the weight of the choices written on those labels. Somewhere between floors, between then and now, my name joined that argument. And I'm terrified that one day, someone lying in that upstairs room will press their ear to the floor and hear me counting dosages in the dark. Story 3. The delivery route. The initial time I noticed anything incorrect with the cul-de-sac, it was because of a box of dog treats. I drive deliveries for one of those large online retailers, the kind that consumes small-town post offices for breakfast. It's not glamorous work, but it pays better than the gas station and keeps my mind busy enough that I don't sit around thinking about how my life didn't go the way I wanted. Most days, the routine is simple. Scan, drop, photo, next. Street after street of the same beige houses with the same worn welcome mats and the same tired people who order more things than they can afford. That day, early winter, sky the color of dirty cotton, my scanner chirped and sent me down into a new development on the edge of town. It was one of those fake communities developers throw up on old farmland. Winding lanes, decorative rocks, young trees that haven't realized they're supposed to pretend this is home. The map labeled the last bend Willow Bend close, even though there were no willows and nothing that bent but the wind. 10 houses, 5 on each side, identical in every way that mattered. Same garage front layout, same vinyl siding, same discount porch lights. But when I rolled in, my headlights swept across dark windows. No cars in driveways, no garbage bins, no bikes tossed on lawns, nothing. The scanner beeped. 3 packages, all for the same address. 14 Willow Bend Close. Dog treats, kitchen gadgets, a set of heavy blackout curtains. The name on the label was H. Grant. I parked at the curb, grabbed the boxes, and walked up the shoveled path. Someone had cleared the snow perfectly, a neat strip right to the door, but there were no footprints. Just one smooth, crisp lane like a tongue. I rang the bell. It chimed somewhere deep inside the house, but no one came. That was normal. People rarely did. I dropped the packages, took the proof of delivery photo, and left. The weird part didn't hit until the next week. Same route, same grey sky, same cul-de-sac. My scanner pinged. 10 packages, all for 10, 12, and 14 Willowbend Close. Different first initials, same last name, same handwriting on the special delivery instructions printed below the barcode. Leave at door, please, no knock. Every house on that loop had the same last name now. Grant. H, L, M, S, J. 4 different first initials. One family. I thought big clan, maybe investment properties. Except there were still no cars, no kids, no decorations. The snow, a little deeper now, was still perfectly cleared from each walkway, like someone had dragged an invisible broom in straight lines from house to street. I brushed it off as a rich people thing. Outsiders bought property sometimes, left them empty, used them as tax write-offs. It wasn't my business. It became my business when the system started marking those addresses as high volume. 3 weeks later, the cul-de-sac was my biggest stop. Dozens of parcels, electronics, bulk food, clothing in multiple sizes, boxes of diapers, protein powder, cleaning supplies. The scanner flagged them as priority customers. Someone was living there, if you measured life in cardboard and tape. But the houses never changed. Still no trash day cans, no curtains twitching, no lights on timers. When I drove through after dark on my way home once, just to satisfy my curiosity, the entire loop sat black against the snow except for a thin glow leaking around the edges of the blinds at number 14, like a television in a room nobody was watching. I mentioned it in passing to one of the other drivers while we sorted loads at the depot. Willowbend, he grunted, not looking up from his handheld. Yeah, I hate that stop. Creepy, right, I said. Feels empty, but not. He finally glanced at me. Just scan and go, man. Company likes them. They spend a lot. That should have been the end of it. If this job has taught me anything, it's that you don't poke at things that don't belong to you. But it kept gnawing at me. There's a difference between a house that's empty and one that's quiet. This didn't feel like either. It felt staged. The turning point came on a Monday after fresh snow. The kind that shows everything. I rolled onto Willowbend Close and hit the brakes before the cul-de-sac opened up in front of me. No tire tracks. None. The snow lay smooth and untouched from the last intersection all the way to the dead end. My truck was carving the first ruts. Yet the walks up to 10, 12, and 14 were already cleared, neat as a magazine advertisement. That same strip, perfectly straight, connecting each door to the pristine road. I sat there for a second, engine idling, staring at those lines. The way they stopped exactly at the curb, not bleeding into the street, the way there were no piles of snow anywhere they should have been shoved. Like the paths had been drawn, not shoveled. My scanner chirped impatiently. I pulled forward. The closer I got, the worse it felt. The houses seemed to lean in, their dark windows following my progress. I parked, killed the engine for once, and listened. The cul-de-sac was the quietest place I've ever stood in my life. Even in winter, you usually hear something. Someone's furnace kicking on, a dog barking, the distant scrape of a shovel. Here, there was nothing, just my breath and the faint tick of metal cooling under my hood. I grabbed the stack for number 14, 10 boxes this time. The label still said H. Grant, same handwriting in the special instructions, but a different phone number in smaller print below the address. I rang the bell out of habit. Silence. After a few seconds, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. The cul-de-sac felt like it was holding its breath with me. Finally, I answered. Hello. Please leave the packages at the door. The voice was male, mid-range, flattened by bad reception. No greeting, no introduction, just that one sentence. I swallowed. Sure, just wanted to confirm you're home. The system. Click. The line went dead. I lowered my phone slowly. The house in front of me sat as still as ever. No movement behind the frosted glass, no shadow passing the narrow sidelight window. But the timing was perfect, too perfect. They had called the second I hit the doorbell. Back at the truck, curiosity finally outweighed policy. Our route app has a feature manager's love and driver's hate, live tracking breadcrumb. It shows exactly where you are when you scan, how long you linger when you move on. But it also shows, if you know where to look, which addresses go to which customer accounts. I pulled up the detail for 14 Willowbend Close. Under account holder, in small grey letters, it said Grant Logistics Corporation. Business, not personal. The phone numbers on all the recent orders tied back to the same corporate registry. Warehouse, not home. Except this warehouse had 10 front doors, no signage, and no loading docks. I should have let it go. I didn't. 2 days later, my route got reshuffled. Weather had shut down some rural roads, so dispatch rerouted me through town first instead of last. That meant I hit Willowbend Close just as the sun started to set. Blue hour. The snow glowed faintly, the sky bruised and low. This time there were tracks. 2 sets of tire marks cut into the cul-de-sac. One set matched mine from earlier, now half filled with drift. The other was new, narrower, leading to the very end of the circle where the road widened for turnarounds. There the track stopped. No car, no sign of anything pulling into a driveway. Just a dark stain of compressed snow, like something heavy had sat there and then vanished straight up. As I rolled to a stop near number 12, movement caught my eye. A curtain on the second floor of number 10 twitched, just a fraction, enough to reveal for a heartbeat the pale oval of a face staring down at me. It was gone before I could focus. What stuck with me was the color of the skin, too grey, too flat, and the angle of the head, tilted slightly too far, like whoever was watching didn't quite understand how to mimic the posture. I pretended I hadn't seen it. I did my job, scan, drop, photo. The atmosphere felt thick around me, full of that muffled quality you get before a storm, even though the forecast had said clear. As I climbed back into the truck, my radio crackled. Not the cab radio, the handheld we used to talk to dispatch. Route 47 status. The supervisor's voice snapped through, sharp with static. On Willowbend, I answered, surprised. They rarely checked mid-stop, dropping off at the close. A beat of silence, then copy that. Please clear that sector quickly and don't linger. We got a client note about loitering. A client note about me, in a place where my only crime was being unsettled. That night, after my shift, I couldn't let it go. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, typing Grant Logistics Willowbend into search bars. Almost nothing came up. A bare-bones corporate site with stock photos and vague mission statements. No physical address listed, just a post office box and a contact us form. The town's property tax records showed the entire cul-de-sac purchased in one block 3 years ago by an entity with the same name, paid in full. No mortgage, no building permits for interior renovations, no business licenses filed locally, just 10 neat parcels stamped private. A week later, I found out what they were using them for. It wasn't on purpose. I wish I could say I was brave, that I investigated. The truth is, I made a mistake. I left my scanner in the truck when I hopped out at 12 Willowbend to grab a stack of boxes. Company policy says you keep it on you at all times. I realized halfway up the walk, swore under my breath, and turned back, annoyed at myself. That's when I saw the basement window. The snow had drifted against most of the foundation, but one narrow rectangular window near the ground was clear. A faint light glowed behind the frosted glass, not warm like a lamp, but cold and bluish, like a screen. As I watched, something moved across it. Not a person. Rows, shelves. For a moment, the silhouette sharpened. Metal racks packed tight with boxes that looked exactly like the ones in my arms, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. A tiny warehouse hidden under a perfect suburban shell. I crouched without thinking, trying to get a better angle. My breath fogged the glass. Inside, a shadow passed between the light and the shelves. It was tall, narrow, moving in quick, precise lines that reminded me more of a scanning arm than any human gait. No stomping, no sway, just smooth mechanical slides. I realized my mistake when the movement stopped. The shadow turned. For a second, I had the insane impression that whatever it was looking straight at me, even though there was no face to speak of, just the suggestion of a head-shaped outline. The light flared brighter, then cut out completely. My radio crackled again, making me jump. Route 47, why are you off pattern? The supervisor's voice was tighter this time. You're showing stationary at Willowbend for 4 minutes. I stood up slowly, heart hammering. Just heavy load, I lied, forcing my voice steady. Dropping now. Copy. Remember, no basement access or side inquiries. Client has strict rules. No basement access. They didn't say no basement. They said no access. I delivered the rest of the boxes on autopilot. As I pulled out of the cul-de-sac, headlights sweeping one last time across those blank windows and perfect paths, my scanner chimed with a new notification. New client preference. No verbal contact. Do not ring bell, do not call. The rest of my shift blurred. Back home, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about that basement, about the shelves, about the fact that someone had eyes on my route minute by minute and cared enough to flag 4 minutes as a problem. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small changes. The number of packages increased. Willowbend deliveries began appearing on multiple drivers' manifests, split between us so no one spent too long in the cul-de-sac. New instructions popped up. Do not photograph occupant vehicles. Do not enter driveways beyond front walk. Dispatch stopped assigning those stops to new hires. It was always veterans, the ones who had learned the first rule of surviving jobs like this. Don't ask questions that nobody wants to answer. I transferred depot 3 months later under the excuse of family reasons. Different town, different routes, new streets with their own oddities. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I pull up the old app on my phone. My login still works. I zoom into our region, find the curve of that fake little road on the edge of our old town. Willowbend Close is still there, 10 parcels, 10 houses. The system marks it a priority business cluster now. Average daily volume, 80 packages. Delivery success rate, 100%. Customer satisfaction, 5 stars. The note section has one new line. Do not assign trainee drivers to this area, requires discretion. I tell myself those basement shelves are nothing more than an efficient storage solution, that the shadow I saw was just a worker in tight quarters, that the face in the upstairs window was a trick of the light. Then I remember the way my radio crackled exactly when I lingered too long, and the way the snow stayed untouched except for those perfect unnatural paths. And I realize that whatever is happening on that cul-de-sac, it's not meant for anyone's eyes but theirs, least of all the guy who used to bring the boxes. Story 4. The lake. I grew up around that lake, and everyone I know swears it's the safest place in town. Families picnic there in the summer. Teenagers sneak beers there at night. Old-timers sit on the benches and talk about the weather. On paper, it's just another glacial lake in central Alberta, cold and clear and postcard pretty. But if you listen closely when the wind dies and the water goes perfectly still, you'll hear the part nobody puts in the brochures. They say the lake keeps what it wants. My job was simple. I worked the rental dock from May through September, handing out paddles and life jackets, checking motors, taking deposits off tourists who thought remote meant charming instead of unforgiving. The dock shack was a faded blue box that smelled like gasoline, wet wood, and sunscreen. I loved it, mostly. It was the one place in town where time felt like it moved differently, stretched out over glassy water in long evenings. The first time I really paid attention to the stories was the day a family from Edmonton asked about the no diving signs. The signs were everywhere, big red letters, 4 different languages, no diving, no swimming past buoy line. Beneath, in smaller print only locals ever bothered to read, was the reason: sudden depth changes, unmapped shelf drop-offs. The lake went from waist deep to what might as well be bottomless in a matter of meters. Every few years, someone ignored the warnings and the search boats went out, dragging hooks through water that never gave back what it took. Is it really that deep? The dad asked me, squinting at the flat blue surface. Looks pretty calm. Sonar never found the bottom, I said, repeating the line I'd heard all my life. They tried mapping it in the 80s. Equipment kept glitching, depth readings looped. He laughed like I'd told a joke and signed the waiver. That afternoon, While they were out on the water, I went into the shack and dug through the bottom drawer where the owner kept old manuals and paperwork. At the very back, under a stack of faded brochures from a defunct tour company, I found the photocopies I remembered from when I was a kid. Grainy black and white sonar printouts, smeared with coffee rings. Jagged lines marking the shore, then a sudden vertical drop into blank. In the margins, someone had written numbers, then scratched them out hard enough to tear the paper. Sensor failure, one note read. Looped at 300 meters, rebooted 3 times, same result. I told myself it was just old tech. Newer fish finders and depth gauges line the shelves of sporting goods stores now. But out on the dock, every single one the rental company installed had the same problem. The screens worked fine near shore, drawing a neat cartoon of the lake bottom. Then at a certain invisible line, the readout would glitch, depth numbers would freeze or spin, the cartoon bottom would flatten into a perfect horizontal band. No matter how far you mowed it out. We joked with customers that it was just a software thing. The regulars stopped asking. What changed things for me was the missing kayaker. It was late August, the last busy weekend before school started, and the weather turned. A university group had come up to camp, loud and overeager and completely unprepared for how fast the temperature drops at night. They rented every boat on the dock, canoes, kayaks, a couple of small aluminum motorboats that coughed and sputtered but still ran. They all came back laughing and sunburned, except for one. His name was Theo. I remember because I wrote it on the rental form along with the time he pushed off from the dock, 3:17 afternoon. Solo kayak, yellow, 1 life jacket, 1 paddle. He had that restless look some people get when they stare out at the lake too long, like the horizon is a dare. I pointed out the buoy line, told him not to cross it. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the far shore. By 6, the wind had picked up. We started calling everyone in. The campers grumbled but complied. As each boat bumped the dock, I checked off names against the clipboard. When I got to the bottom of the list, one space was still blank. "Where's Theo?" I asked the group, huddled on the boards, shivering now that the sweat was cooling on their skin. They looked at each other, faces shifting from confused to annoyed to worried in the space of a heartbeat. "He was ahead of us," one girl said. "He said he wanted to see the cliffs on the north side. He said he'd turn back at the boys," another added, like that mattered to the lake. We called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I radioed the owner, who called the mounted police detachment. Within an hour, the little lake that had felt like my private world all summer was crawling with flashing lights and search teams. They found the kayak at dusk, drifting just beyond the buoy line. No cracks, no signs of impact. The paddle floated nearby. The life jacket lay neatly folded in the bottom of the boat, as if waiting for him to put it back on. They dragged the water until 3 in the morning. Lights from the rescue boats cut harsh white paths across the black surface, making the lake look less like water and more like a sheet of metal. Sonar arrays hissed and pinged. Divers went down on safety lines, came up shaking their heads, teeth chattering, lips blue. Steep walls, one muttered to no one in particular. Then nothing, just down. By sunrise, the search had turned into recovery. By sunset, it turned into paperwork. The official line was presumed drowned. People left flowers on the dock. The story joined the others that circulate quietly at the diner and the gas station and the school staff room. Do you remember the student who went under without a trace? The details blur over time. The year changes, the name shifts, but the core stays the same. The lake took someone, and we never got them back. I could have let it fade like all the rest, but I couldn't shake the image of that life jacket, folded, placed. It didn't fit. On my days off, I started going out alone in the oldest rental boat we had, a dented aluminum thing with peeling paint and a motor you had to sweet talk to life. I brought one of the fish finders and a notebook. I told curious coworkers I was trying to find better fishing spots. In truth, I was tracing the line. The glitch point was always in the same place, roughly aligned with the last buoy on the north side. There was a patch the locals called the shelf. The depth would climb steadily from shore to maybe 20 feet, then slope gently down. Then abruptly the gauge would jump, Flash 120 meters, 300, error. The map wiped and redrew as a flat band. If I drifted back a few meters, it worked perfectly again. On a calm afternoon, when the lake mirrored the sky so perfectly it made me dizzy to look at it, I killed the motor and let the boat slide. The fish finder screen flickered as I crossed the invisible boundary. The depth readout cycled, then froze on infinity. For a long moment, there was no sound but my own heartbeat and the quiet slap of water against aluminum. I leaned over the side and stared down. The water was so clear near shore you could count rocks on the bottom. Here it wasn't clear or murky. It was something else, a weird uniform dark that swallowed light instead of bending it, as if the lake had a pupil and I was peering into it. A shape moved beneath the boat. Not a fish, not a log, just a slight distortion, like heat shimmer underwater, rising toward the surface. The boat rocked gently, though there were no waves. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to start the motor and back away, but my hand wouldn't move. I watched, transfixed, as the shimmer reached a point just below the hull and stopped. The boat stilled. The water went perfectly flat. Then the fish finder shut off, not beeped, not glitched. It simply went dark, the screen cutting to black as if someone had unplugged it. At the same time, my phone in my pocket vibrated once, then died. Battery at 64% a second earlier. The sudden silence felt thick, pressing against my ears. I don't know how long I sat there frozen. Eventually, the wind picked up just enough to break the surface tension. Tiny ripples lapped against the boat, and whatever was holding me in place eased. I yanked the motor cord so hard I nearly dislocated my shoulder. It coughed, sputtered, then caught, shrieking louder than it ever had before. I didn't look back as I tore away from that spot, heart hammering in my throat. Back at the dock, my phone flickered back to life the second my boot hit wood. The fish finder rebooted as if nothing had happened. No error logs, no history of shutdown. That night, I dreamed of a kayak drifting in circles over a hole that wasn't a hole so much as an absence. In the morning, I called in sick. People still come to the lake. They still rent our boats and ignore the boys and tell each other campfire versions of what happened to students and fishermen and careless swimmers over the years. Every story is the same. 1 second the person is there, the next they're gone. No splash, no struggle, just an empty space where a body should be. Sometimes they ask me, half joking, if the lake is haunted. I say no. Ghosts are about the past. What we have feels very present, very aware. It doesn't rattle chains or whisper names. It just waits, patient, unchanging, deep in a place our equipment can't chart and our maps can't show. On closing weekend this year, I locked up the shack, turned off the lights, and took one last look at the water. The surface was calm, a perfect mirror. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was inviting. Behind me, someone at the picnic area laughed too loudly, trying to shake off the autumn chill. A kid threw a rock and we all watched the ripple spread, then disappear. The lake went still again, as if nothing had disturbed it. I handed in my resignation the next day. When people ask why I left a job I loved, I tell them I got tired of the cold, tired of the tourists, tired of the same stories. That's all true. But the part one keep to myself is simpler and harder to explain. I started to feel like the lake knew me back. Out there on those quiet afternoons when the fish finder went blank and the atmosphere went heavy, I would have this sudden overwhelming certainty that if I stepped wrong, if I leaned too far, if I trusted the flat calm for even a second, I would end up like Theo, another name the town couldn't quite remember, attached to a story everyone swears they heard differently. And somewhere under that flat dark surface, something would open just wide enough to take me in and close over without a trace. Story 5. The back roads. If you ask anyone around here what's the scariest thing about driving back roads at night, they'll tell you it's the ice, or the moose, or maybe the drunk rigs barreling home after a 14-hour shift. Nobody ever mentions what walks on two legs when nothing should be walking at all. My route home from the shop cuts across County Road 19, a strip of cracked asphalt slung between fields and tree lines like someone forgot to finish paving the world. In summer, it's just another dusty shortcut. In winter, It turns into a tunnel of black trees leaning in close, snowbanks piled like walls on either side. My old half-ton knows that road better than I do. We've done the same drive so many times that I could almost let it steer while I think about anything else. The first time I saw the carcasses, I blamed coyotes. It was late November, the kind of cold that makes metal ache. I had stayed late at the shop finishing a clutch job for a farmer who needed his truck before dawn. By the time I looked up, the sky was already bruised purple, a thin smear of sun bleeding out behind the grain bins. County Road 19 was the quickest way home, so I took it, humming along to some old rock station barely coming in over the static. My headlights swung around a gentle curve, and there, at the edge of the ditch, lay a cow. At least I thought it was a cow at first. Big, heavy body, hide torn open, steam rising from the exposed flesh into the cold atmosphere. I slowed automatically, more out of mechanic habit than anything else. You see something on the road, you check if someone needs help. Up close, it looked incorrect. The body was arranged too neatly, legs folded under it like it had lain down to sleep, not collapsed. The head was turned toward the fence line, eyes wide and glassy, tongue lolling just enough to show teeth. The rib cage, though, that was the worst part. It was open clean, not ragged like a predator had torn into it. The bones had been spread in a precise fan, ribs snapped at near identical points. Something had pulled that animal apart like it was following a diagram. Still, I told myself it was coyotes. Maybe the farmer had dragged it there after a rough carving and let the scavengers do the rest. People do practical things out here that look brutal if you squint. I drove on, hand tight on the wheel, trying not to picture whatever set of teeth could crack bone that clean. 2 nights later, there was another one. Different field, same road. This time it was a deer, laid out in almost the exact same pose, legs tucked, head turned, chest cavity spread open like a book. The snow around it was barely disturbed. No tracks leading in or out that I could see in my headlights, just a ring of clean white, and beyond that the dark wall of trees. I stopped, left the engine running, my breath fogging as I stepped out. The silence pressed in hard. No wind, no rustle, just the idle of my truck and the soft ticking of cooling exhaust. Up close, the deer looked like it had been on a table. The cut around the rib cage followed a smooth curve, no jagged edges. The heart was gone, not torn, not chewed, gone, as if removed with purpose. Something in my chest tightened. An animal part of my brain that didn't care about logical explanations suddenly very sure that I was being watched. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I did a slow circle with the flashlight I keep in the cab. Trees, fence posts, the glint of frozen puddles in the ditch, nothing else. I backed away without turning around and climbed into the truck, locking the doors out of pure instinct, even though whatever could do that to a deer wouldn't be stopped by a bit of plastic and metal. My tires slipped slightly as I pulled away, and for a second the headlights swung across the tree line on the opposite side. In that thin slice of light, something moved. It was fast, a vertical shape cutting between trunks, there and gone. Tall, taller than any person should be unless they were on stilts. The impression wasn't of a man, though. There was a joint too high up, like the knees were in the wrong place, a set of elongated arms that didn't quite swing right. The beam caught a flash of pale, not clothing, but skin, or something like it. Then darkness swallowed it again. I told myself it was an elk, a weird angle, light playing tricks. I also started taking the highway home for a few days, adding 15 minutes to my drive and telling anyone who asked it was because the county hadn't plowed 19 yet. Of course, habit wins out over fear when gas is expensive and sleep is short. By mid-December, I was back on that road. The snowbanks had grown taller. The trees wore heavy coats of frost. The world had narrowed to 2 lanes and however far my headlights reached. The third carcass wasn't by the ditch. It lay directly in my path, rounding another slow curve. This time it was a calf, small enough that I couldn't pretend some farmer had chosen this spot for easy disposal. Someone or something had dragged it out and left it squarely across the center line. I hit the brakes hard, tires skidding on packed snow, the truck fishtailing before coming to a stop a few meters short. The calf's eyes reflected my headlights in a way that made my guts twist. Wide, glassy, ringed with a strange milky film. The chest was opened, the ribs spread in that same fan shape, but now the pattern was even more precise, like whatever was doing it was refining its technique. The spine was intact, the limbs untouched. Only the soft parts were missing. I sat there, gripping the wheel, heart pounding loudly enough to drown out the ticking of cooling brakes. The road ahead was blocked. The ditches were deep. Backing up on that ice would be asking to slide into a drift and spend the night in a freezing cab, which meant I had to get out, move it, touch something that was very clearly part of a pattern I didn't want any part of. I told myself to quit being a coward. I've field-dressed animals before. Blood and bone don't usually bother me. I opened the door. The cold hit me like a slap, stealing my breath. My boots crunched on the snow, louder than seemed possible. Every small sound was amplified in the stillness. Halfway to the calf, I heard it. Not a growl, not a howl, a clicking. It came from the tree line to my right, a rapid dry clatter, like someone tapping two pieces of wood together in a complex rhythm. It would start, stutter, stop, then start again in a slightly different pattern. There were no echoes. The sound soaked straight into my bones. I froze. The clicking stopped. For a moment, the night was so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then from the left side of the road, the pattern answered. Same clicking, same tempo, mirrored. Whatever was in those trees, there were at least two of them, talking over me like I was a table between their chairs. A thin wheeze escaped my throat. I backed up slowly, every instinct screaming not to turn my back, not to run. The calf lay between me and the truck now, silent and obscene, its open ribs looking like teeth. The clicking resumed, faster now, back and forth, like a conversation escalating. With the next volley, something else threaded through the sound. A tone, not quite a whistle, not quite a voice. It rose and fell in a way that made my tongue go numb, like my body was reacting to frequencies my ears couldn't process. I made a choice then. I stepped over the calf, grabbed its hind legs with numb hands, and dragged. The body slid easier than I expected, leaving a dark smear on the snow that steamed in the cold atmosphere. The clicking grew louder on both sides, matching my movements. For one horrible second, I had the impression that they were amused. As soon as there was enough space, I dropped the legs, stumbled back to the truck, and slammed the door. My fingers fumbled the key. The clicking spiked, then cut off clean the instant the engine roared back to life. I didn't look into the trees as I drove around the carcass. I stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel, every muscle coiled tight. Only when I hit the next intersection and saw the faint orange glow of the highway lights in the distance did I start to breathe properly again. The next day, I went back in daylight. Part of me hoped I'd imagined the whole thing, that I would find nothing on the road, no sign of any calf, no marks. Of course, it was still there, or what was left of it. The body had been moved again. It lay nearer the ditch now, ribs closed like hands in prayer. The smear on the road was gone. The blood at the edge of the snow was not. Tracks led away from it, but not the kind I knew. They were elongated impressions, too long to be hoof, too narrow to be boot. Each print had two deep points at the front and a faint drag at the back, like something with jointed legs had stepped, sunk, and then pulled itself free. They went straight into the trees, not wandering, not circling, direct. On the opposite side of the road, in the ditch, I found my own boot prints from the night before. They looked clumsy and round in comparison. Beside them, overlaying some, matching others stride for stride, were another set of the long prints. Whatever had been in those trees had come right up to where I had stood, and then somehow left no sound I could hear. I stopped driving County Road 19 after dark. After that, I told myself daylight made things safer, more ordinary. Shadows are shorter. Trees look less like they're leaning in to listen. But even at noon, on clear days, I saw things that didn't fit. Fence posts with deep gouges too high up for any animal I know, crows that refused to land on certain stretches of wire, wheeling and cawing until they cleared an invisible line. The last straw was the night I found the marks on my truck. I'd just finished a late shift, but I took the long way home along the highway like I'd promised myself. Snow squeaked under the tires, sky heavy with more on the way. When I pulled into my driveway and stepped out with my lunch pail, something above me caught the porch light. 4 parallel grooves carved into the roof of my truck, running from the back window toward the windshield. Each groove was deep enough to have stripped paint and exposed bare metal, edges clean as if done with a machine. They were spaced too evenly to be random, too precise to be from a falling branch or stray chain. There was a second set of marks on the hood, shorter, closer together, like something had braced itself there, peering in through the windshield. My knees went weak. I walked around the truck once, then again, half expecting to find more, or worse. There were no footprints in the snow around it that didn't belong to me. Nothing disturbed on the roof where the scratches ended, as if whatever had climbed on had not needed to jump off. I called in sick the next day. Told the boss I had the flu. Spent the morning in the shed installing a dash cam and 2 cheap security cameras facing the road and the driveway. It made me feel better while the sun was up. At night, lying awake in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the clicking, about the way the carcasses had been arranged, not eaten, about whatever had been close enough to touch my truck in my own yard without leaving tracks. I wondered how long it had been learning the patterns of our roads, our routines, how long it had been practicing on cows and deer before it decided to step onto the asphalt itself. Sometimes I still see fresh roadkill on County Road 19 when I'm forced to use it during the day. Most look normal, broken, messy, but every now and then, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a body laid out just a little too straight, ribs parted just a little too cleanly. I keep driving. I don't stop anymore. I tell myself that if I ignore it, it will ignore me. Then on certain nights when the wind is low and the house creaks just so, I swear I hear a faint dry clicking from somewhere out past the tree line. Not close, not yet, just practicing. Story 6. The church organ. The initial time I played the organ in that church, I thought the strangest thing about it was how clean it smelled. Most old churches carry layers of scent, candle wax, dust, old hymnals slowly rotting on the shelves. This one, perched on the only real hill above our little Alberta town, smelled like bleach and lemon polish. The wooden pews gleamed. The stained glass shone without a streak. Someone cared about how this place looked in the daylight. What unsettled me came after the sun went down. I took the job because I needed money and because my mother said playing in church would be good for my soul. I play piano and organ well enough to fake confidence in front of a congregation, and the offer came with a bonus, a key to the side entrance so I could practice whenever I wanted. In a town where thin walls carry every argument to the neighbors, having a place to make loud music alone felt like a luxury. On my first evening there, the pastor walked me through the rules. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with careful hands and a permanent squint, like the light hurt his eyes. Never leave the building unlocked, he said. Don't use the main doors after dark. Don't play past 10. And this door, he tapped a narrow scuffed door behind the choir stalls, stays closed. Storage only. Old junk. Not safe. He held my gaze a second too long after that last word, then smiled like he'd made a joke and moved on. The organ was beautiful, old but well-tuned. The pipes rose like metal trees behind the altar, catching the last streaks of sunset through the stained glass. When I sat down to play, the sound filled the vaulted ceiling in a way that made my chest ache. For an hour, there was nothing in the world but music and the soft breath of the bellows. Sometime around 9, I felt it. It was subtle at first, a shift in the atmosphere, a sense that the room was no longer empty except for me. The sanctuary doors were closed. The side entrance was locked. My car sat alone in the gravel lot. Still, as my fingers moved over the keys, I had the faint prickling certainty that someone stood just out of sight, listening. I stopped mid-hymn. The last chord lingered, then dissolved into quiet. The silence that followed had weight, like wool pressed over my ears. Then very softly, children started singing. The sound came from behind me, behind the choir stalls. Small high voices humming a melody I half recognized. Not words exactly, just a tune. It rose and fell in imperfect unison, the way kids do when they half remember a song from school or an old tape. I turned on the bench, heart hammering. The chairs on the risers were empty. The scuffed door the pastor had pointed out sat closed, its paint chipped, hinges dark with age. The voices kept going. They weren't echoing from the sanctuary. They weren't outside. They were right there, on the other side of that door, as clear as if a children's choir was crammed into a closet, singing with all the seriousness in the world. My first irrational thought was that someone was playing a recording as a prank, a speaker hidden in the walls maybe. But the sound wavered in a way recordings don't. A cough here, a giggle there, someone a beat behind the rest. Human. Hello. My voice sounded too loud, bouncing off the stone. The singing stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt different from the comfortable quiet after a hymn. This one had edges. I stood up, walked slowly toward the door. My shoes made small sounds on the worn wooden floor. The closer I got, the more incorrect it felt. The atmosphere near the door was cooler, and it smelled faintly of something that didn't match lemon polish and candle wax, damp concrete and old stale water. I put my hand on the knob and froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. There was no reason, no sound, but my body reacted as if I'd just leaned over the edge of a cliff. My stomach dropped. My knees wanted to fold. I took my hand away and stepped back. Just storage, I reminded myself, using the pastor's word. Old junk, not safe. I left all the sanctuary lights on as I grabbed my bag and practically ran down the side stairs to the exit. The next Sunday, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Long day, nerves, the way big empty buildings play with sound. During service, the church was full of voices, mostly older folks singing the same hymns I'd grown up hearing, plus a handful of bored kids kicking the pews and whispering in the back. Everything felt normal. The pastor thanked me for the music. A few parishioners told me how nice it was to have real organ again instead of pre-recorded tracks. After coffee hour, when most people had gone home, I found a moment to ask one of the longtime members about the strange door. "Oh, that," she said, following my gaze. "They used to have the Sunday school rooms down there. Flooded years ago. They sealed it off. Mold, I think. Nasty business. Flooded," I repeated. Was there a burst pipe or... She cut me off with a quick shake of her head, eyes darting toward the pastor who was deep in conversation with one of the deacons. "Old story," she said. "Best to let it rest. We don't talk about it much. Building is safe now. That's what matters." She walked away before I could press. That evening, I went back to practice again. This time I kept an eye on the clock. 8, 8:30, 9. Nothing. No voices. No strange chills. I started to feel foolish, embarrassment slowly replacing fear. I played louder, rolling into a complicated piece just because I could. When the church's antique clock chimed 10 from the foyer, I stopped. Rules were rules. I gathered my music, stood, and turned to leave. From behind the door, a single child's voice began to hum. It was soft at first, one clear line, the same not quite familiar melody as before. Within seconds, other voices joined. No laughter this time, no coughing, just a growing chorus, building in volume and confidence, as if they knew I was listening and wanted me to hear. My hand tightened on my bag strap. This close to the organ, I could see faint marks on the floor leading from the choir stalls to the door, worn paths in the wood, like small feet had shuffled there over years. The door itself had tiny scratches near the bottom, at ankle height. Kids' heights. "Stop," I whispered to them, or myself, I'm not sure. They didn't. The tune shifted subtly, bending around notes I recognized from one of the hymns in the old book but twisted, like someone had taught them the incorrect version on purpose. The last line rose and hung in the atmosphere, unresolved, waiting for a cadence that never came. I backed away and left, not bothering to turn off the sanctuary lights this time. After that, I started asking questions in quieter corners. Older parishioners gave half answers, Stormy is back, basement took in water, we lost some families. No one would say exactly how. The words accident and tragedy floated around, never landing. The more I pushed, the more people shifted to talk about bake sales and choir festivals instead. One afternoon, while hunting for spare sheet music in the office, I found an old binder misfiled between hymnals. Inside were attendance sheets from decades of Sunday school classes. Names, ages, check marks in neat columns. Then abruptly, there was a week where 5 families' children stopped appearing on the list. No note saying moved, no transfer forms. Their names were simply there one week and gone the next, like someone had decided erasing them from the paper might erase what had happened. I recognized 2 of the surnames from the older gravestones in the churchyard. That night, I brought a small handheld recorder to practice. I didn't set out to capture anything specific. I told myself it was for reviewing my own playing, listening for mistakes. But I placed it on the organ bench beside me, lens pointing toward that locked door all the same. When the clock chimed 10, I stopped playing and hit record. Silence for 3 beats. Then, as if on cue, the humming began. Listening to it live is one thing. Listening to it later through headphones, alone in my kitchen, is another. On the recording, the sound is thin at first, like radio static. Then it sharpens, separating into distinct voices. I counted at least 7, some higher, some slightly lower, all children. They held the melody with eerie precision, no longer wobbling the way kids usually do. Underneath the singing, so faint I nearly missed it, was another sound, a steady rhythmic rush, like water slapping against concrete walls. At the end of the phrase, the voices stopped together, as if cut. For 2 seconds, the only thing on the track is that water sound getting slightly louder, then fading. I took the recorder to the pastor the next day. He listened with his eyes closed, face unreadable. When the clip ended, he exhaled slowly and handed the device back. "There are no children in this building after dark," he said. "You know that." "I know what I hear," I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "And now you do too. Why is that door locked? What's under there?" He rubbed the bridge of his nose, suddenly looking older. "A long time ago," he said carefully, "before I came, there was a storm. The river flooded. The basement classrooms weren't sealed properly. It was fast. The drainage failed. By the time anyone realized what was happening, he stopped. His jaw worked. He swallowed. Some lives were lost," he finished. "It was a horrible accident. We renovated. We sealed the basement. We don't use it anymore. That door stays closed. We remember them in prayer, not in ghost stories." "And the singing," I pressed. "You're telling me that's nothing?" He met my eyes for a second, and in that moment I saw something that looked very much like fear. "I'm telling you," he said quietly, "to follow the rules. Don't play past 10. Don't open that door. Some things are better left undisturbed." I should have listened. The next week, a snowstorm rolled in, whiteout conditions. Church events were cancelled. The hill road became a mess of ice and drifts. I told myself I would skip practice, but habit won. By evening, the wind had died some, and the urge to play, to lose myself in something structured and beautiful, was too strong. I parked in a nearly buried lot, trudged through knee-deep snow, and let myself in the side door. Inside, the church felt different. The outside storm pressed against the walls, muffling the space. The sanctuary lights flickered once before holding steady. I played harder than usual, loud enough to drown out any stray sounds. The clock chimed 9, then 10, but I kept going, telling myself rules didn't matter in bad weather. I was alone. No one would care. At 10:15, every light in the sanctuary went out at once. The organ cut off mid-chord, not fading but stopping, as if someone had pulled an unseen plug. For a beat, my eyes couldn't adjust. Then the stained glass windows glowed faintly with snow-reflected streetlight, painting the pews in smudged colors. And from behind the choir stalls, the children began to sing. They were louder than they'd ever been. The sound filled the dark, layered, and strong. I could hear words this time, though they made no sense. Fragments of a hymn but out of order, lines about water and mercy twisted around each other. A high voice broke on one note, gasped, then kept going. My hand found my phone, fingers fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam stuttered, then held. I pointed it toward the door. The paint near the bottom bubbled and flaked, like it had been soaked and dried too many times. For the first time, I noticed a faint watermark halfway up the frame, a darker band that ran in a perfect line along the wall behind the stalls. The singing swelled, pressing against my skin. My eyes stung. For a horrible moment, I had the dizzy sensation of standing waist-deep in cold water, even though the wooden floor under my boots was dry. Something thumped against the other side of the door. Once, twice, small hands. The knob rattled gently, then with more force, as if someone was trying it over and over. I did what I'd been told not to. I stepped forward and grabbed it. The metal was freezing under my palm, so cold it burned. The humming cut off mid-note. On the other side, the breathing sound stopped, replaced by a silence so total it roared in my ears. I stood there holding that knob, heart racing, waiting for some surge, some force, some sign. Nothing came. The lights flickered back on. The organ hummed quietly, ready. The atmosphere lost its damp chill. Somewhere outside, a plow rattled past, its blade scraping pavement. I let go. The next Sunday, the pastor announced that due to ongoing electrical issues, the church would be closing for evening events for the winter. No more night rehearsals, no more late practices, morning services only. He didn't look at me once during that whole speech. I took the hint. I still play there on Sundays. I still walk past that scarred door every week. The scratches are still at the bottom. The watermark is still along the wall, visible if you know to look. Sometimes, as I settle on the bench, I feel that prickle at the back of my neck and know the building is listening. I don't stay past 10 anymore. I don't bring recorders. I don't touch the knob. But on stormy nights, when the snow piles against the foundation and the hill road disappears into white, I lie in bed and hear, faintly, a chorus of small voices threading through the wind. They never quite reach the final line of their song, always stopping just before the resolve. It feels less like a haunting and more like a rehearsal that never ended. Story 7. The motel working nights at the Prairie View Motel taught me two things fast. First, people will tell a stranger behind a front desk things they'd never admit to their closest friends. Second, there's a kind of silence that only exists in small highway towns after midnight, where the lights hum, the vending machine rattles, and the rest of the world might as well not exist. The Prairie View sat just off the two-lane highway that cut through our Alberta town, the kind of place truckers and oilfield guys used because it was cheap and close to the gas station. 20 rooms, one ice machine that only worked when it wanted to, a faded sign that buzzed when the wind hit it wrong. I took the night clerk job after my dad's health went sideways and I needed something that let me be home during the day. They gave me a small office, access to the coffee machine, and a front row seat to strangers' worst decisions. It didn't start weird. Most of my shift was keycards, late check-ins, and telling drunk men where the nearest pizza place was. The motel had a simple system: cash or card, identification, photocopy, a few signatures on a form nobody read. Then I'd assign a room. We had regulars too, rig hands cycling through on rotation, long-haul drivers who always wanted the same spot so they could back their rigs up to the window and keep an eye on their loads. Then there was Room 7. On paper, Room 7 was just another double with a view of the gravel lot. In reality, it was different from the start. I noticed it my first week when I was going through the reservation system trying to learn the software. Every other room showed a mix of one-night stays, weekends, the occasional week-long booking. Room 7 had a separate section blocked out in grey, weeks at a time, tagged with a note, company, no walk-ins. The company was a name I didn't recognize. Not one of the big oil outfits, not a trucking firm, just 3 vague initials and a post office box. Once a month, like clockwork, someone from that company would fax over a sheet with the dates they needed. Sometimes it was a whole month straight. Sometimes just a few days. Always room 7. Always cash on arrival in a thick white envelope. The people who stayed in that room rotated. That was the point, they said. Staff housing for contractors, the manager explained when I finally asked. Guys heading out to remote sites, cheaper than apartments. They just need a place to sleep between hitches. Don't bother them. They won't bother you. At first, it checked out. Men came in late, hauling duffel bags and wearing the same brand of steel toes and high-vis jackets. They signed in with their first name and an employee number, handed over nothing but a company badge for identification, and disappeared into room 7. Most left before dawn, the door clicking softly shut behind them. Their keys would end up in the Dropbox. Habit, muscle memory. What threw me was the cameras. We had 2 ancient security cameras in the lobby and 1 pointed at the parking lot. They were more for insurance than safety. No one watched them live. Still, every night before my shift ended, I'd flip through the feeds out of boredom, half expecting to catch someone trying to steal the vending machine. One slow Tuesday around 3 in the morning, I pulled up the lot camera and noticed something odd. The timestamp showed midnight when one of the company guys had checked in. I remembered him clearly, mid-30s, quiet, tired eyes. He'd asked if there was coffee and if I could give him a full morning wake-up call. I watched the footage, waiting to see him step back out. He never did. The recording showed him pull his truck into a spot near the ice machine, grab his duffel, and walk toward the long exterior corridor. He unlocked room 7, went inside, and the door closed. After that, nothing. Hours of sped-up footage where snow drifted in little eddies, headlights swept across the lot from passing traffic, a stray cat nosed around the dumpster. No one left room 7. No one entered either. When my shift ended at 6, I checked the system. His name was gone from the in-house list. Room 7 showed as occupied, corporate. No checkout time. No record of payment besides the envelope I'd already sealed in the safe. I told myself I'd messed up. Maybe I'd forgotten to log him properly. Maybe he'd left before the camera's motion sensor picked him up. The idea of someone vanishing in a straight line between the hallway and the parking lot didn't fit easily in my head. A few weeks later, it happened again. Different guy this time. Older, heavier, a nervous laugh when he realized there was no bar on site. Same drill, company badge, envelope, room 7. I watched him on the lot camera later, out of habit. Same pattern, truck in, bag out, door closed, no exit. I tried to shake it off as a tech problem. The lot camera was ancient. Maybe the motion sensor was failing. Maybe the angle missed the exact slice of walkway outside 7. But the longer I worked there, the more I noticed other things that didn't add up. The towels and linens for that room never ended up in the normal laundry bins. Housekeeping would come in the morning, wheel their carts past 7, and skip it entirely on some days, even when the system showed the room had been used. On other days, they'd go in and emerge with clear plastic bags that went straight into a locked closet, not down the usual chute. When I asked Marta, the head housekeeper, about it, she shook her head hard enough that her earrings flashed. "You worry about the desk," she said. "We worry about the rooms." The manager, Mr. Fenton, acted like it was a favor we should be grateful for. "Corporate contracts keep this place alive," he reminded me. "That company pays on time and doesn't complain. All they ask is privacy. You like getting your paycheck, don't you?" I did. My dad's medication bills didn't leave a lot of room for pride. Then the family came in. It was a bitterly cold Saturday. The highway was a river of salt and slush. Around midnight, the lobby door banged open and a woman hurried in, dragging a teenage girl behind her. Both had that raw look of people who'd been crying for hours and were now held together by nothing but adrenaline. "Excuse me," the woman said, breath fogging in the atmosphere. "My brother stayed here last week. We think this was his last stop before he went missing." I straightened. "I'm sorry. What's his name?" She gave it. I knew it before she finished speaking. I remembered his face from a few nights back, nervous laugh, corporate badge, room 7. I tried to keep my voice even. Let me check our system. The booking software showed exactly what I expected and nothing I wanted to see. One night, company rate, paid in cash envelope. No forwarding address. No checkout time. Just a status change from occupied to corporate hold at 4 in the morning. We filed a police report, the woman said, wringing her hands. His phone last pinged near here. They said we called everyone else on his route. This is the only place that confirmed he checked in. Did you see him leave? I thought of the lot camera, of how he'd walked into room 7 and never appeared again. Our records don't show more than that one night, I said carefully. I can print the invoice for you. Sometimes banks can trace where the cash came from if it was an automated teller machine. She nodded numbly. The girl beside her stared at the key rack, eyes red, jaw tight. Can we see the room? She asked abruptly. Please. Maybe he left something. A note. Anything. For a second, I started to say no. The words company policy rising automatically to my tongue. Then something mean and tired in me snapped. I was sick of the closed doors and grayed out blocks on the screen. Sick of feeling like an accomplice to something I didn't understand. Give me a minute, I said. I'll have to check with my manager. I ducked into the back office and called Fenton. It rang longer than usual. What? He answered, voice groggy. I explained. Missing person. Family. Room 7. I didn't mention the cameras. There was a long pause. Tell them we don't have access to that room today, he said finally. Corporate has it sealed until their next check-in. That could be weeks, I protested. They're looking for their brother. We could just call him. His tone sharpened. We are not getting between a paying client and their security procedures. Give them the invoice. Suggest they contact the company directly. That's it. You understand? Something rustled near the phone on his end. A softer voice, someone else awake in his house, murmured a question. He covered the receiver, answered, then came back on. And don't go in there yourself, he added. That's what the note on your orientation paper meant. Certain rooms are out of your scope. You want to keep this job. You respect that. He hung up. I stood there in the humming silence of the back office, the motel's boiler cycling on and off in the walls, and felt a thin line of cold run down my spine. When I went back out, the woman's face told her everything she needed to know before I opened my mouth. They won't let you, I said softly. It's under another booking right now. I'm sorry. She laughed once, a sharp, ugly sound, then covered her mouth. The girl glared straight at me. He didn't just disappear, she said. People don't just vanish between one stop and the next. I didn't answer. I printed the invoice, slid it across the counter, watched their hopes shrink to a scrap of paper. After they left, I waited until the lobby was empty, then pulled up the lot camera feed from the night her brother stayed. I watched him arrive again, pull into the same spot, grab his bag, walk toward room 7. Mid-stride, the image glitched. For half a second, the figure on the screen stretched like a bad compression artifact. His legs elongated, his torso thinned, his head blurred. The timestamp froze. Then the picture snapped back. The frame where he should have opened the door and gone in was a smear of static. After that, the hallway was empty. I rewound, played it again. The same glitch, the same impossible distortion. Every other guest that night appeared clear. Only that segment, that few seconds between the truck and the door, broke. That was when I stopped thinking of room 7 as just a room. I lasted another month. In that time, 3 more company guys came and went, their names appearing in the system, then shifting to corporate hold with no visible exit. The housekeepers kept skipping certain days. The envelopes kept coming on time. And every now and then, late in the shift, when the highway was quiet and the fluorescent lights buzzed a little too loud, the line on the in-house board that said room 7 occupied would flicker, like it was trying to decide between yes and no. I quit on a Wednesday. I told Fenton my dad's health had gotten worse, that I needed a job with more daylight hours. He frowned at the short notice, then shrugged. "You lasted longer than most," he said. "Nights aren't for everyone." On my last shift, just before dawn, I walked the exterior corridor with the excuse of checking for ice. I paused outside 7. The door looked like any other. Same paint, same dent near the handle from where someone had once slammed it with a suitcase. There was a faint hum behind it, not a television, not snoring, something lower, electrical, like a refrigerator or a server rack might make, something that didn't fit the cheap furniture and thin walls I knew were inside. I didn't put my ear to it. I didn't knock. I went back to the lobby, turned in my key, and watched the sun crawl up over the flat horizon as I drove home. Now, when I pass the Prairie View on my way to the newer motel where I work days, the sign still buzzes. The lot fills and empties with the usual mix of trucks and compacts. Room 7's curtain never seems to move. Sometimes on slow afternoons, a thought sneaks and I can't shake. Those men's families probably think they vanished on some back road or remote job site. They picture snowstorms or equipment failures. They don't picture a forgettable little motel by a highway, a specific door in a row of 20, and a clerk who watched them walk into a room the world pretends doesn't exist once the contract is signed and the envelope hits the safe. And I wonder how many other small towns have a room 7 of their own, quietly occupied on paper forever, while no one ever sees who, if anyone, comes back out.